I'm Eleanor, 68 years old, standing outside the funeral home where my husband Richard lies in repose. My daughter Catherine blocks the entrance, her face contorted with rage. "You don't deserve to be here after what you did to Dad. Go away." The words pierce my heart like daggers. Just then William, our family lawyer, hurries up the steps with a briefcase. "This isn't right," he whispers to me. "Wait until she hears what's in the will." Before continuing my story, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever been misjudged by someone you love. Trust me, what happened next changed everything. Richard and I met during our sophomore year at Berkeley in 1975. I was studying literature, and he was already focused on business and economics. We literally bumped into each other at the campus library, sending his stack of finance books tumbling to the floor. As we gathered them up, our eyes met, and that was it. A classic love story beginning that I replayed in my mind for decades. Richard was ambitious, charming, and incredibly focused. Within 6 months, we were inseparable. His dreams were big. He wanted to build a real estate empire, starting in California and expanding across the country. I was captivated by his vision and confidence. When he proposed on graduation day, I didn't hesitate to say yes. We married that summer in a small ceremony with just our closest friends and family. Our early marriage was a whirlwind of hopes and dreams. Richard immediately began working for a prominent real estate development firm, while I took a position teaching English at a local high school. We lived frugally in a tiny apartment, saving every penny for Richard's dream of starting his own company. Those first 2 years were magical. We were partners in everything, staying up late discussing business plans and our future. When I became pregnant with Catherine in our 3rd year of marriage, Richard was ecstatic. He'd always wanted a daughter, and when Catherine arrived in 1980, he doted on her from the first moment. I can still picture him holding her tiny body in his large hands, tears streaming down his face, promising her the world. As Catherine grew, so did Richard's business ambitions. By the time she was 3, he had secured enough investment capital to start Hammond Development Group. The timing meant crucial decisions for our family. Richard needed to focus entirely on the business, working 16-hour days. We agreed that I would put my teaching career on hold to raise Catherine and support his dreams. It seemed like the right choice then, a temporary sacrifice for our collective future. Catherine was the most beautiful child, with Richard's striking blue eyes and my auburn hair. From her earliest days, she worshipped her father. Even as a toddler, she would wait by the window for his car, squealing with delight when he arrived home, no matter how late. Richard always made time for her, even during the most stressful business periods. He'd bring her little gifts and spend weekend mornings with her, taking her for pancakes or to the park. I noticed the first troubling signs when Catherine was about 6. She began to exhibit jealousy whenever Richard showed me affection. If he kissed me hello, she would wedge herself between us. If we were talking, she'd interrupt constantly until she had his full attention. Richard found it amusing, even flattering. "She's just a daddy's girl," he'd say with a proud smile. But I sensed something more concerning developing. As the business grew, Richard's absences became longer and more frequent. He was traveling across the state, then the country, pursuing deals and investments. Catherine and I were often alone for days, sometimes weeks. I tried to maintain our family connection, taking photos of Catherine's activities to share with Richard, arranging video calls before they were common, creating special family dinners when he was home. By the time Catherine entered middle school, Richard's company had expanded dramatically. We moved from our modest home to a mansion in an exclusive neighborhood. Catherine began attending a prestigious private school. Material comfort replaced Richard's presence. He missed school plays, parent conferences, and family dinners. When he was home, he was exhausted or preoccupied. I watched as Catherine's relationship with her father transformed. Their weekend outings stopped, replaced by expensive gifts. She began to associate her father with success and wealth, concepts that became central to her identity. Meanwhile, she increasingly viewed me as the one who enforced rules, maintained boundaries, and represented the ordinary aspects of life she had grown to disdain. By her 15th birthday, Catherine had become openly hostile toward me. She blamed me for Richard's absences, convinced I was somehow driving him away. "He works so hard because you spend too much money," she once shouted during an argument about her curfew. "If you were more interesting, maybe he'd want to come home." The cruelty stunned me, but what hurt more was Richard's silence when I told him about it. He merely suggested I try harder to connect with our daughter. As Catherine entered her final years of high school, the distance between us felt insurmountable. She excelled academically, following Richard's footsteps toward business school. She spoke of joining his company someday, building the Hammond legacy. I was proud of her ambition but worried about the growing emotional void in our family. Richard had become a visitor in our home, and Catherine had become a stranger to me. Catherine left for Stanford in 1998, following her father's alma mater. She barely said goodbye to me on move-in day, saving her tears and embraces for Richard. I tried to maintain our connection through care packages, phone calls, and campus visits, but she consistently rebuffed my efforts. Her responses to my calls grew shorter, her excuses to avoid visits more frequent. Meanwhile, she and Richard spoke daily about her classes, her future, and the business. It was during Catherine's sophomore year that my world cracked open. While organizing Richard's home office, I discovered text messages between him and his assistant Jennifer. The exchanges were unmistakably intimate, filled with plans for their next encounter and reminiscences of their last. I confronted Richard that evening, clutching printouts of the messages in trembling hands. "It doesn't mean anything, Eleanor," he said, his voice eerily calm. "Jennifer understands the pressures I'm under. She helps me relax." When I asked how long it had been going on, he admitted to nearly a year. I was devastated, not just by the betrayal but by how casually he dismissed its significance. After days of agonizing, I made the decision that would shape the rest of our lives. I would stay, not for Richard but for Catherine. She idolized her father, and I couldn't bear to shatter her image of him or our family. Richard promised to end the affair, and I pretended to believe him. We entered a silent agreement to maintain appearances. Richard's company continued its meteoric rise throughout the early 2000s. Hammond Development Group expanded into commercial real estate across the western states. Richard appeared in business magazines and local news. His success became the centerpiece of our family identity, even as our actual family disintegrated behind closed doors. Catherine graduated with honors in 2002 and immediately enrolled in Stanford's MBA program. Her ambition mirrored Richard's, and they grew closer through their shared passion for business. During her rare visits home, she and Richard would closet themselves in his study, poring over market reports and investment strategies. I became a housekeeper in my own home, preparing meals that often went uneaten, cleaning rooms that nobody acknowledged. After completing her MBA, Catherine joined Hammond Development as Director of Acquisitions, a position created specifically for her. Father and daughter became an inseparable business team. They traveled together to meetings, attended conferences, and strategized over long dinners. I was never invited to these events, nor were my opinions on the business ever solicited. By 2008, I rarely saw either of them. The financial crisis had created both challenges and opportunities for Hammond Development, and Richard and Catherine worked seemingly endless hours. Our home became a way station where they occasionally slept or changed clothes. I filled my days with charity committee work and book clubs, constructing a life independent of them. My loneliness was profound, but nothing prepared me for the second betrayal. At a charity gala I attended alone, Richard and Catherine were in New York for meetings. I overheard two women discussing Richard's affair with Margaret Lawson, his business partner. They fell silent when they noticed me, faces flushing with embarrassment. I maintained my composure until I reached my car, where I finally allowed myself to break down. This affair was different. Margaret wasn't some young assistant. She was Richard's peer, a powerful woman in her own right. Their relationship wasn't just physical. It was a partnership of equals. I realized then that Richard hadn't just betrayed our marriage. He had replaced me entirely. I sank into a depression that lasted months. I consulted a divorce attorney secretly, but couldn't bring myself to file papers. After 30 years of marriage, who would I be without Richard, without the Hammond name? I had surrendered my career, my independence, and my identity to support his success. The prospect of starting over in my late 50s terrified me. During this dark period, I made one final attempt to connect with Catherine. I invited her to lunch on her birthday, away from the office and Richard's influence. She arrived late, checked her phone constantly, and barely engaged in conversation. When I tentatively raised concerns about her work-life balance, she exploded. "Don't project your disappointments onto me," she snapped. "Just because you gave up everything for Dad doesn't mean I have to make the same mistake. I'm building something meaningful with him, something you could never understand." She left before the entrees arrived, and I sat alone, finishing my meal in silence as other diners glanced at me with pity. What Catherine didn't know, what Richard had carefully hidden from both of us, was that his health had begun to fail. Later, I would discover that he had received his first concerning test results that very month. His doctor had recommended immediate lifestyle changes and follow-up tests. Richard had chosen to tell neither his wife nor his daughter, continuing his punishing work schedule and hiding his symptoms. I discovered Richard's illness completely by accident in early 2015. A prescription bottle fell from his jacket while I was hanging it in the closet. The medication name was unfamiliar, so I researched it online. It was used to treat advanced heart failure. Confronting Richard that evening, I expected denials or minimization. Instead, he looked relieved. "I was diagnosed 6 months ago," he admitted, sinking into his leather chair. "The prognosis isn't good. Maybe a year, possibly less." The shock of his words was quickly overshadowed by another revelation. "Catherine knows," he added quietly. "We've been making arrangements for the company." I stood frozen, trying to process not just his impending death but the deliberate exclusion. They had known for months, making plans and preparations while I remained ignorant. My husband was dying, and I hadn't been deemed important enough to be told. "Why keep this from me?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Catherine entered the room then, having overheard our conversation. Her expression was cold, defensive. "Because you'd make it all about you," she said. "Dad needs to focus on the business transition, not manage your emotions." "This has nothing to do with the business," I replied, struggling to maintain composure. "This is about our family, our marriage." Catherine laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "What marriage? You've been living separate lives for years. You're just a gold digger who stayed for the lifestyle. You never supported Dad's vision the way I have." Richard sat silently, offering no defense of our 35 years together. His silence felt like confirmation of Catherine's cruel assessment. In that moment, something broke inside me. The last thread of hope that our family might somehow heal. "I'll be staying with my sister for a while," I announced, leaving the room before either could respond. I packed a small suitcase and left that night, checking into a hotel before arranging a short-term lease on a small apartment across town. I needed space to think, to grieve, to plan for a future I had never imagined. Richard's condition deteriorated rapidly over the following weeks. I learned this not from him or Catherine, but from mutual friends who assumed I was fully informed. He had been hospitalized twice, each time with Catherine at his side. I tried to visit him during his third hospital stay, only to be blocked by Catherine in the corridor outside his room. "He doesn't want to see you," she insisted, arms crossed. "You abandoned him when he needed you most. Just stay away." I retreated, wondering if Richard truly had requested my absence or if Catherine was acting as gatekeeper. I sent flowers and cards, uncertain if they ever reached him. My calls to his cell phone went unanswered. During this painful period, I began receiving anonymous emails containing financial documents related to Hammond Development Group. Balance sheets, loan agreements, tax filings, all suggesting the company was in serious financial trouble. The sender never identified themselves, signing only as a concerned party. After the third such email, I contacted Samuel Parker, a private investigator recommended by my attorney. Samuel's investigation revealed disturbing truths. Hammond Development had been leveraged to the hilt for years, with Richard taking increasingly risky positions to maintain the appearance of success. The 2008 financial crisis had dealt the company a devastating blow from which it had never fully recovered. Richard had been shuffling assets, taking predatory loans, and possibly engaging in accounting irregularities to keep the business afloat. Most shocking was the discovery that Richard had mortgaged our family home, twice, without my knowledge, forging my signature on the documents. Our seemingly solid financial foundation was actually a house of cards, ready to collapse. The Hammond fortune was largely smoke and mirrors. I faced an excruciating moral dilemma. Should I confront Richard with this knowledge during his final days? Should I warn Catherine about the financial time bomb she was about to inherit? Or should I protect myself by quietly securing what assets I legally could? Before I could decide, I received the call I had been dreading. Richard had passed away in the hospital during the night. Catherine had been with him. I had not been notified that the end was near. My husband of 35 years had died without saying goodbye. The morning of Richard's funeral dawned cold and overcast, matching my emotional state. I dressed carefully in a simple black dress, pearl earrings Richard had given me on our 20th anniversary, and a wedding ring I had removed weeks ago but replaced for this final day. I arrived at Westlake Memorial Chapel 30 minutes before the service was scheduled to begin, hoping to have a quiet moment alone with Richard before others arrived. I should have known Catherine would be there early, standing sentry. She intercepted me at the entrance, her tall figure blocking the doorway. She looked exhausted, dark circles beneath her eyes, but her posture was rigid with hostility. "You have a lot of nerve showing up here," she hissed, keeping her voice low as a few early attendees approached behind me. "Dad didn't want you here." "I was his wife for 35 years, Catherine," I replied evenly. "I have every right to say goodbye." Her eyes flashed with anger. "Wife? You were nothing but a parasite. You lived off his success while contributing nothing. You abandoned him when he got sick." Her voice was rising now, drawing attention from people arriving for the service. "That's not what happened and you know it," I said, trying to move past her into the chapel. She shifted, physically blocking my path. "You don't deserve to be here. Go away," she shouted, loud enough that heads turned throughout the parking lot. "You broke his heart when he needed you most." Guests were openly staring now, whispering to each other. I recognized business associates, neighbors, friends, all watching this painful spectacle. My face burned with humiliation, but I held my ground, refusing to be driven away from my husband's funeral. "Catherine, please," I said softly. "Not here. Not today." "Don't tell me what to do," she snapped. "I was there for him. I took care of him. I'm his real family, not you." A murmur ran through the growing crowd. I could see judgment in their eyes, condemnation. They didn't know the whole story. How could they? All they witnessed was a daughter defending her father's memory against a wife who had apparently abandoned her sick husband. Just as Catherine launched into another tirade, a firm voice cut through the tension. "That's quite enough, Catherine." William Harrison, Richard's attorney for over 20 years, approached with purposeful strides. He was carrying his customary leather briefcase, his expression grave but determined. "This is a private family matter, William," Catherine said dismissively. "No, it isn't," he replied. "This is a funeral for a man who explicitly documented his wishes for today, and those wishes included his wife's presence." He turned to me with unexpected gentleness. "Eleanor, please come inside. Richard wanted you here." Catherine's face flushed with anger. "You can't be serious. After everything she did." William remained unmoved. "I'm following your father's explicit instructions. Eleanor not only has the right to be here, but her presence is required for the reading of the will immediately following the service." "The will can wait," Catherine insisted. "This is about respecting Dad's memory." "Respecting his memory means honoring his final wishes," William countered. "And he was very clear about what those were." He offered me his arm. "Shall we, Eleanor?" With a grateful nod, I took his arm, keenly aware of Catherine's furious glare as we passed her. The walk down the center aisle of the chapel felt interminable. Eyes followed my progress, some sympathetic, others curious, many judgmental. The whispers were audible. "I heard she left him when he got sick. Apparently she's been living with another man. She's just here for the money." Each step required all my strength and dignity. Richard's closed casket sat at the front, surrounded by arrangements of white lilies and roses. I paused before it, placing my hand on the polished wood for a brief, silent moment of farewell. 35 years of love, disappointment, joy, and betrayal condensed into that single touch. I took a seat in the front row, the place traditionally reserved for the widow. Catherine arrived moments later, pointedly sitting on the opposite side of the aisle. Throughout the service, the eulogies from Richard's business partners, the readings, the music he had selected, she alternated between dabbing at tears and shooting venomous glances in my direction. As the service concluded, William approached the podium. In accordance with Richard Hammond's wishes, the reading of his last will and testament will take place immediately following this service. The family and named beneficiaries are asked to proceed to the Hammond Development Group headquarters, where we will convene in the main conference room at 2 p.m. sharp. Catherine looked startled, clearly having expected the reading to be scheduled for another day. She cornered William as people began to file out. I couldn't hear their conversation, but her agitated gestures made her displeasure clear. William remained impassive, occasionally shaking his head. As I prepared to leave for the office, several of Richard's colleagues approached to offer condolences, their earlier judgment seemingly softened by William's public support. Catherine watched these interactions with visible resentment before storming out to her car, leaving me to find my own way to what would prove to be the most shocking revelation of all. The main conference room at Hammond Development Group headquarters had always intimidated me. The massive mahogany table, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, the walls adorned with awards and photographs documenting Richard's rise to success. All of it designed to impress and slightly overwhelm. Today, it felt particularly oppressive as I took a seat near the door, trying to be as unobtrusive as possible. Catherine sat at the head of the table, in Richard's usual chair, a symbolic claiming of territory that wasn't lost on anyone present. A few key executives, Richard's elderly mother Grace, his brother Thomas, and several cousins completed the gathering. The atmosphere was tense, heavy with unspoken questions and assumptions. At precisely 2 p.m., William entered, accompanied by his junior associate carrying several folders. He nodded professionally to everyone before taking his position at the opposite end of the table from Catherine. The room fell silent as he arranged his documents. "Thank you all for coming," William began formally. "Before I proceed with the reading of Richard Hammond's last will and testament, I must inform you that Richard left specific instructions that a personal letter be read aloud before the will itself. He was most insistent on this point." Catherine frowned. "Is that really necessary, William? We're all eager to proceed with the business matters." "It is not only necessary but required," William replied firmly. "This letter is, in fact, an official addendum to the will and carries the same legal weight." Without waiting for further objection, he opened a sealed envelope and began to read. "If this letter is being read, then I, Richard Hammond, have passed from this world, leaving behind a legacy far more complicated than most of you realize. I have lived a life of ambition and achievement, but also one of profound mistakes and regrets that I must now acknowledge. For 35 years, Eleanor has been my wife, standing by me as I built Hammond Development from nothing. While I pursued my ambitions, she sacrificed her own career, managed our home, and raised our daughter. In return, I gave her an increasingly empty marriage, emotional neglect, and the ultimate betrayal of infidelity. Not once, but multiple times over the years." Gasps echoed around the table. Catherine's face had gone rigid with shock. Richard's mother closed her eyes, a pained expression crossing her features. William continued reading, his voice steady and professional. "My affairs were not brief indiscretions but long-term betrayals, including a 15-year relationship with Margaret Lawson, whom many of you know as my business partner. I compartmentalized my life, convinced I could maintain these separate worlds without consequence. I was terribly wrong." Catherine started to speak, but William held up a hand, continuing without pause. "Even more serious than my personal failings are my professional ones. Hammond Development Group has been insolvent for nearly 7 years. The 2008 financial crisis devastated our core investments, and rather than accept this reality, I began taking extraordinary measures to maintain the appearance of success." The executives exchanged alarmed glances as William continued. "I leveraged every asset, took loans at predatory rates, and engaged in accounting practices that, while technically legal, were deeply unethical. The company that appears so robust is, in fact, burdened with debt that exceeds its assets by a considerable margin. Catherine's face had drained of all color. Her hands gripped the arms of her chair so tightly her knuckles had turned white. The revelation about the company's finances clearly shocked her as much as anyone. "Catherine, my daughter, whom I have loved beyond measure," William read, his voice softening slightly. "You have been my greatest joy and in some ways my most significant failure. I encouraged your adoration and allowed you to idolize me, knowing I did not deserve such devotion. I fostered your resentment toward your mother to deflect from my own guilt. For this I am deeply sorry." Catherine's expression crumpled momentarily before hardening again. She stared at the table, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. Then came the bombshell that changed everything. "There is one final truth that must be revealed, the most difficult of all. Catherine, I have allowed you to believe your entire life that you are my biological daughter. This is not the case." The room went completely still. I felt as though all the air had been sucked out, leaving us suspended in a moment of collective shock. Before Eleanor and I were married, I had a brief relationship with Andrea Reynolds, who worked at my first development company. When she informed me she was pregnant, I panicked. I was already engaged to Eleanor, with our wedding only months away. I paid Andrea to keep the pregnancy secret and arranged for private adoption papers to be prepared. When Eleanor and I married, I suggested we adopt immediately rather than waiting to have biological children. The adoption was arranged through a private attorney, with papers that disguised the true circumstances. Eleanor never knew you were actually my biological child with another woman. I raised you as my daughter because you are, in every way that matters, my flesh and blood, just not Eleanor's. I couldn't breathe. The room spun around me as 35 years of my life rearranged themselves into a pattern I had never suspected. Catherine wasn't my daughter. The child I had raised, loved, and been rejected by had never been mine at all. I looked across at Catherine and saw her staring at me, her expression a complex mixture of horror, confusion, and dawning comprehension. William paused, allowing the shocking revelation to sink in before continuing. "With these truths now spoken, I turn to the disposition of my estate. Hammond Development Group will file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection immediately upon my death. The company's legitimate assets will be liquidated to satisfy creditors as far as possible. The family home, which remains the one significant unencumbered asset in my estate, I leave to Eleanor, along with my personal investment portfolio and life insurance policy, which together should provide her with financial security for the remainder of her life. This is not generosity but the barest minimum of what she deserves after decades of loyalty. I did not reciprocate. To Catherine, I leave a trust fund of $1 million, to be disbursed in annual payments over 10 years. This trust comes with the condition that she complete therapy with a licensed professional for a minimum of 2 years, addressing the unhealthy dynamics I fostered in our relationship." Catherine shot to her feet, her face contorted with rage and disbelief. "This can't be legal. He wasn't in his right mind when he wrote this." "I'll contest it." William calmly reached for another document. Richard anticipated that reaction. He underwent comprehensive psychological evaluation when preparing this will, with 3 independent experts confirming his mental competence. Additionally, there is DNA evidence confirming the paternity revelation, which Richard had processed through 2 separate laboratories. Catherine swayed slightly, gripping the table for support. "This is all her fault," she said, turning to me with naked hatred. "You turned him against me at the end. You manipulated him when he was weak." "I knew nothing about any of this, Catherine," I said quietly, still reeling from the revelations. "I'm learning it all just as you are." William intervened. "That is correct." Richard confirmed to me that Eleanor remained unaware of these circumstances until this reading. He made these decisions independently, motivated by a desire to make what amends he could before his death. Catherine grabbed her purse and jacket. "I don't believe any of this. My lawyers will be in touch." She stormed toward the door, pausing only to deliver a final venomous statement. "You were never my mother, and now I know why. You were just some woman my father felt sorry for." The door slammed behind her with such force that the awards on the wall rattled. The remaining family members and executives departed quickly, murmuring awkward condolences as they fled the uncomfortable scene. Soon, only William and I remained in the vast conference room, surrounded by the artifacts of Richard's complicated legacy. "There's one more thing," William said gently, sliding a sealed envelope across the table. "Richard asked me to give you this privately. It's for your eyes only." I took the envelope with trembling hands, uncertain whether I could bear any more revelations. But as the weight of the day's discovery settled around me, I realized that truth, however painful, was preferable to the elaborate deceptions that had shaped the last 35 years of my life. I didn't open Richard's letter immediately. Instead, I tucked it into my purse and asked William to drive me home. Not to the mansion that was now legally mine, but to the small apartment I had rented after moving out. I needed familiar surroundings, a safe space to process the seismic shifts in my understanding of my life. William respected my silence during the drive, offering only practical information about the coming days. The bankruptcy proceedings would begin immediately. The mansion would need to be prepared for eventual sale, though I could take my time with that decision. My financial situation, while not as extravagant as I might have once expected, was secure. "Richard did love you, Eleanor," William said as he pulled up to my apartment building, in his own damaged way. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. How do you evaluate a love built on such profound deception? 35 years of marriage reduced to his own damaged way. Alone in my apartment, I finally opened Richard's letter. His familiar handwriting covered several pages, more personal than the formal statement William had read. "Eleanor," it began, "by the time you read this, you will know the truth, or at least, more of it than you've known before. I've spent decades constructing elaborate facades. Successful businessman, devoted father, community leader. The only role I truly failed at was being your husband, and it's this failure that haunts me most as I face the end." He detailed the beginning of his affair with Andrea, his panic at her pregnancy, the elaborate scheme to adopt his own biological child and present her as a stranger's. "I told myself it was an elegant solution," he wrote. "You wanted children immediately, and here was my child needing a home. That Catherine wasn't biologically yours seemed a small detail then, one easily concealed for everyone's benefit. But the deception had poisoned everything," Richard admitted. His guilt manifested as emotional distance. He transferred his affections increasingly to Catherine, the living embodiment of his secret. He encouraged her attachment to him while subtly undermining her relationship with me. "I couldn't bear to see you love her so completely, knowing what I had kept from you," he confessed. "Each time you mothered her with such devotion, my shame deepened." The affairs, the financial risks, the elaborate lies, all stemmed from the same broken place inside him, an inability to live authentically or confront his own failures. "I constructed a house of cards," he wrote, "believing I could maintain it indefinitely through sheer force of will. Now that it's collapsing, I can finally see how much damage I've caused to everyone I claim to love." The letter ended with an apology that felt simultaneously inadequate and deeply sincere. "I can't undo the past or give you back the years that might have been different had I been braver, more honest. All I can offer is the truth, finally, and the hope that unburdened by my deceptions, you might find peace and perhaps even happiness in the years ahead. You deserved so much better than the husband I was." I read the letter 3 times before setting it aside, emotionally exhausted yet strangely calm. The mysteries that had haunted our marriage now had explanations. Not justifications, but at least clarity. The puzzle pieces of our family dysfunction clicked into place, forming a picture that was painful but comprehensible. The following days passed in a blur of practical arrangements. I avoided the mansion, sending an assistant to retrieve essential personal items. The media caught wind of Hammond Development's bankruptcy filing, and business reporters began piecing together the story of the company's collapse. Catherine made good on her threat to contest the will, filing preliminary paperwork challenging Richard's mental competence despite the evidence William had presented. A week after the funeral, I forced myself to visit the mansion, needing to confront the physical space where so much deception had occurred. The house felt cavernous and cold, filled with expensive furnishings that suddenly seemed like props on an elaborate stage set. In Richard's study, I discovered a hidden safe behind his collection of first-edition business books. The combination was my birthday, an unexpected sentiment from a man who had forgotten to acknowledge that date more often than not in recent years. Inside were journals dating back decades, meticulous records of his double life. I spent hours reading them, following the tortured logic of a man who had trapped himself in an increasingly complex web of lies. There were moments of genuine remorse scattered throughout, particularly in the later volumes as his health declined and mortality forced honest reflection. Most surprising were the entries about me. Despite his betrayals, Richard had maintained a kind of reverence for me that bordered on awe. "Eleanor remains the most fundamentally decent person I've ever known," he wrote in one entry. "Her capacity for love and forgiveness terrifies me because I know I don't deserve either." In another, "Watched Eleanor gardening today, so focused and content. I envy her ability to find joy in simple things, to be present in her life rather than constantly scheming about the future as I do." These glimpses of how he had seen me, not as the naive dupe I had feared but as someone possessing strengths he recognized and even envied, provided unexpected comfort. The woman in his descriptions was someone I could recognize and respect. Perhaps I hadn't been quite as blind as I had feared. That night I slept in the mansion for the last time, in the guest room rather than the master suite. In the morning, I contacted a realtor about listing the property, and began making arrangements to donate most of the furnishings to charity. The museum-like quality of the house had never reflected my personal taste. It had been another of Richard's constructions, designed to project success and sophistication. 2 weeks later, Catherine's lawyer contacted William requesting a meeting. I agreed to attend, steeling myself for more accusations and anger. Instead, I found Catherine subdued, almost shell-shocked. The initial rage had burned away, leaving confusion and grief in its wake. "I had a DNA test done," she said without preamble as we sat in William's office. "It confirmed everything. You're not my biological mother. Andrea Reynolds was." I nodded, unsure what response she expected. "Have you tried to contact her? She died 10 years ago. Cancer." Catherine's voice was flat. "I found her obituary online. She never married or had other children." The knowledge that Catherine had lost both biological parents sat heavily between us. Despite everything, I felt a surge of protective instinct toward this woman I had raised and loved, regardless of biology. "I'm dropping the will contest," Catherine said after a long silence. "Not because I think it's fair, but because fighting it means dragging all this into public view. Dad's reputation is already being dismantled by the bankruptcy. I can't bear to add more scandal." "That seems wise," I replied carefully. She met my eyes directly for the first time. "I don't know how to make sense of any of this. Everything I believed about my life, my family, was a lie." "Not everything," I said softly. "I didn't know you weren't biologically mine, Catherine. When I held you as a baby, when I taught you to read, when I cheered at your graduations, my love was real. That wasn't a lie." Her eyes filled with tears that she quickly blinked away. "I need time to process all this. I can't just forgive and forget 30 years of resentment because Dad left a convenient explanation letter." "I'm not asking for forgiveness," I assured her. "Just acknowledging that while Richard deceived both of us in different ways, what we had as mother and daughter wasn't entirely false." Catherine nodded stiffly, gathering her belongings. "I'll be in touch about practical matters through William," she said, her professional mask slipping back into place. But as she reached the door, she paused. "For what it's worth, I am sorry for what I said at the funeral. You didn't deserve that." It wasn't reconciliation, but it was a start. A small crack in the wall of hostility that had separated us for so long. 6 months after Richard's funeral, I stood on the porch of my new home, a modest cottage near the coast, watching waves crash against the shore. The mansion had sold quickly, despite the taint of scandal surrounding the Hammond name. Most of the proceeds went to Richard's creditors, but my personal inheritance remained intact, providing comfortable security without the extravagance I had never particularly valued. The cottage suited me perfectly. Enough space for my books, a garden where I could get my hands dirty, and proximity to the ocean I had always loved but rarely visited during my marriage. For the first time in decades, I lived in a home that reflected my own tastes and priorities, rather than Richard's carefully constructed image. I had begun volunteer work with the literacy program at the local library, using my teaching background in a meaningful way. There was something profoundly satisfying about helping adults who had never had educational opportunities develop reading skills that opened new worlds to them. It wasn't the career I might have had without the detour of my marriage, but it brought fulfillment I had long been missing. My relationship with Catherine remained complicated. After our meeting in William's office, she had retreated into her work, taking a position with a smaller development firm in Seattle. We communicated primarily through brief emails and occasional phone calls, mostly about practical matters related to Richard's estate. But there were signs of thawing in her attitude. A birthday card, a Christmas gift, questions about my new home that suggested genuine interest. 3 months after I moved to the cottage, I took a risk and reached out with a more personal invitation. "I have Richard's journals," I wrote. "They contain a lot of information about the company, but also about his relationship with Andrea, his feelings about you, and his regrets. I thought you might want to read them. You deserve to know your own history." Catherine didn't respond immediately, and I feared I had overstepped. But a week later she called. "I've been seeing a therapist," she said without greeting. "Part of the will's conditions, but it's actually helping. She thinks it might be good for me to read the journals, to understand him better." We arranged for her to visit the following weekend. I prepared the guest room nervously, unsure what protocol applied when hosting your non-biological daughter, whom you had raised for 30 years under false pretenses. Should I cook her favorite childhood meals? Would that seem manipulative? Should I maintain distance? Would that seem cold? Catherine arrived on a Friday evening, her corporate polish slightly softened by casual clothes and hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked younger, more vulnerable, reminding me of the teenage girl who had once lived in my home before ambition and Richard's influence hardened her. "The house suits you," she said, surveying the cozy living room with its overstuffed bookshelves and comfortable furniture. "It feels more like you than the mansion ever did." "It is," I acknowledged. "Would you like a tour?" The evening progressed with careful conversation, both of us navigating the complex terrain between our shared past and uncertain relationship. After dinner, I brought out the box containing Richard's journals. "You can take these to your room if you prefer privacy," I offered. "Or you can ask me questions as you read. Whatever feels right." Catherine hesitated, her hand hovering over the box. "Did reading these help you make sense of things?" I considered the question carefully. Yes and no. They explained a lot about Richard's behavior, but they also showed me how differently we experienced the same marriage. His perspective was so foreign to me in some ways. She nodded and took the box. "I think I need to start alone. But maybe we can talk tomorrow." Catherine emerged late the next morning, eyes red-rimmed but expression calm. She had spent the night reading, following her father's twisted logic and complicated emotions through decades of deception. Over coffee on the porch, she began to ask questions about my marriage, about her childhood, about moments she remembered differently than Richard had recorded them. "He wrote that when I was 8, you wanted to enroll me in art classes, but he convinced me I wouldn't enjoy them," she said. "I remember begging not to go because I wanted to spend Saturdays with him at the office instead." "Was that really your idea?" "You showed such talent for drawing," I confirmed. "Your elementary school teacher mentioned it at a conference, suggested we nurture that creativity. But whenever I brought it up, you'd get upset." "He was sabotaging you," Catherine said quietly, "over and over in ways I never noticed." The conversation continued throughout the day, painful but necessary excavation of our shared history. Catherine revealed how Richard had subtly encouraged her resentment, positioning himself as the parent who understood her ambitions while painting me as old-fashioned, overprotective, unambitious. I shared the isolation I had felt as she and Richard formed their alliance, excluding me from their bond. "I was so awful to you," Catherine admitted as sunset painted the ocean in brilliant oranges and pinks, "especially those last few years. I believed everything Dad implied about you being jealous of our relationship, of my success. You were working with the information you had," I said. Richard constructed a very convincing narrative for both of us. "But I was an adult," she insisted. I should have questioned why my father's wife would just abandon him during his illness. It never made sense, but I didn't want to see that. The weekend marked a turning point. Catherine didn't leave as my daughter again. Too much had happened for such simple restoration. But she left as someone willing to build something new from the ashes of our former relationship. She took Richard's journals with her, promising to continue therapy and process the complicated legacy he had left her. Over the following months, our communication became more regular. Catherine called weekly, sharing struggles at her new job, insights from therapy, memories from childhood she wanted to revisit. I learned about her life as an adult, her friends, her brief relationships, her professional challenges, in a way Richard's dominant presence had previously prevented. 1 year after Richard's death, Catherine visited again, this time bringing Richard's journals back with her. "I've read them enough," she said, placing the box on my coffee table. "I understand him as much as I ever will. But I realize something important. I know more about Dad's thoughts and feelings than I do about yours. I've spent my entire life seeing our family through his eyes." "What would you like to know?" I asked. "Everything," she said simply. "Who you were before you met him. What you dreamed about. What you really thought during all those years. I want to know my mother. The person, not just the role." The word mother hung in the air between us, significant and healing. Biology might not connect us, but 30 years of shared history did. Complicated, manipulated history, but ours nonetheless. In the days that followed, I shared stories from my life that Catherine had never heard. My childhood in a small coastal town not unlike the one I'd returned to. My college dreams of becoming a literature professor. My early passion for teaching before I set it aside for Richard's ambitions. I showed her photographs from before she knew me, a young woman with hopes and plans independent of the Hammond name. "I wish I'd known this version of you," Catherine said as we walked along the beach on her last evening. "I think I would have liked her." "She's still here," I replied. "Just older and a bit wiser." Catherine smiled, a genuine expression without the tension that had marked her face for so long. "I think I'm ready to try again," she said. "Not to pretend nothing happened, but to build something honest this time. Whatever that looks like." As I reflect now on the journey from that horrible day at Richard's funeral to this tentative peace, I'm struck by how truth, however painful, offers possibilities that deception never can. Richard's elaborate lies provided temporary comfort, but ultimately destroyed the very relationships he sought to protect. Only in their unraveling could authentic healing begin. The cottage by the sea has become more than just my home. It's a gathering place where Catherine visits regularly, where we slowly rebuild trust through honest conversation, where we're learning to be family without Richard's manipulative presence between us. I've started painting, exploring creativity long dormant during my marriage. Catherine recently brought her new boyfriend to visit, a kind architect with no connection to the business world Richard inhabited. Life continues to surprise me with possibilities I never imagined during those dark days when I stood outside a funeral home, barred from saying goodbye to my husband. The pain hasn't disappeared entirely. Such profound betrayal leaves permanent marks, but it no longer defines my days or limits my future. I often wonder what lessons others might take from our family's complicated story. Perhaps the most important is that authenticity, however difficult, ultimately offers the only path to genuine connection. The elaborate facades we construct to protect ourselves and others eventually become prisons that separate us from the very people we claim to love. Have you ever discovered that something you believed about your life or relationships wasn't true? How did you handle that revelation? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if our journey through family secrets and hard-won reconciliation resonated with you, please consider subscribing to this channel for more stories of resilience and healing. Remember to like and share if you found value in our experience. Thank you for accompanying me through this chapter of my life. Your support means more than you know.